Well, thanks for everyone for coming out. Really happy to be a part of this, I guess, inaugural spacecraft series. When Pavlina was asking who might be interested in giving any presentations regarding the history of spaceflight or spacecraft in general, I signed up immediately. So the first presentation I'm going to do tonight in the series is going to kind of be kind of bring us up to speed from World War II to right about the time the Mercury program starts kicking off. And then the second half of the presentation in April will kind of be Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and kind of lead into the space shuttle. And Joe will take over from there and do the space shuttle in May. So a little bit about me. I've been out here in Colorado for about 5 years. I was in Orlando last 15 or so years. Lucky enough to work for Seminole State College. Out there, we were lucky enough to have media credentials for Kennedy Space Center, so we got to record a lot of the launches, which was a lot of fun. When I first got out there in 2003, Orlando's not too far from the Cape at all, and every time there was a shuttle going up, you could see it just plain as day. And I was just absolutely amazed by it. I wasn't heavily into the subject at all. I didn't know a lot of the history, but just knowing that you had a spaceport, not far from where you lived and where you worked, and every day I would watch these launches go up, and no one else seemed to care. There's a shuttle going up, and they're like, "Yeah, it happens all the time." So that's what really got me just mesmerized by the space program. And then being lucky enough to teach some astronomy, work at a planetarium, and then have the media credentials to go and actually just be about 3 miles from the launch pad and visit some of these rockets and see even some of the projects that you worked on. Got to see Perseverance launch, got to see OSIRIS-REx launch. So it was great. Moved out here in 2020 and just been big into astronomy. Life gets in the way sometimes, and you try and do your hobbies on the side. But finally, my girlfriend and I joined the Astronomical Society last June and became the outreach coordinators for DAS. And so we've been busy as possible. I'm going to plug our program. Of course, if you don't know about us, we're the ones that are going out to the schools, to the STEM field trips, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, anyone that wants to see the night sky. We bring our telescopes out. We have about 40 or 50 volunteers with scopes that bring their scopes out, and we just show people the universe. So if you're interested in becoming a volunteer for outreach, Maria's here. She can get your contact information or just email us, and we'll get you on the list. We've got a bunch of fun events coming up in March and so on, so we're looking forward to a real busy summer. Hello, come on in.
How are you?
So again, I'm going to take you to the beginning of space flight. Really concentrating on 1940 to 1958 in this presentation, and then again the second presentation next month will take us to 1969. Rocketry goes back a long time. We think that it might just be in the last couple centuries, but human beings have been transfixed with some form of rocketry in one way or another. 9th century going all the way back to gunpowder being used on rockets. Even something as simple that we use all the time as fireworks would be considered a rudimentary rocket. But you can see here, based on the history, how long human beings have been trying to shoot things up into space. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, a very important kind of a godfather of rocketry. He started putting together the mathematical formulas for taking an object that has mass and giving it thrust and allowing it to move in a direction. So he was really one of the early pioneers of rocketry on the European side. 1903 was an important year, obviously not necessarily related to rocketry, but in just less than 70 years, we go from the first flight to landing on the moon. So it's amazing how quickly the advancement of technology and the advancement of us as human beings putting machines in the air and having that wonder of slowly moving up towards the cosmos. The Soviet Union had been working on rocketry, right around the turn of the century, and there was a group called GERD, and they were a bunch of rocket pioneers who had just an intense interest in trying to put together the dreams of space travel. How do we get started with dreams of space travel? And 1907, these founding members put together this group. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long because you had the Great Purge in the Soviet Union that arrested and incarcerated and put a lot of these people in camps because they were considered an enemy of the state. But it just goes to show, just as early as 1907, we have scientists putting together the fundamental principles of rocketry. On the U.S. side, we've got, of course, Robert Goddard, and he would be considered probably the godfather, the creator of rocketry on the U.S. side, and an American professor that was just dreamed of sending spacecraft into the stars. This is a beautiful image of his first patent, the first patent for a multi-stage rocket in the United States. This is just really beautiful too. It almost feels like it should be art in your living room, doesn't it? Absolutely fantastic. But he was the one that started the liquid fuel system of combining liquid fuels and using them for propulsion. And his fundamental work would eventually obviously lead to the success of the United States. So you've got the Soviet Union working on early pioneer systems of rocketry. You've got the United States working on early systems of rocketry. But what really started to get things moving, other than it just being a form of an interest, was war. And the Germans were busy putting together the German rockets that would eventually kind of be the precursor for the rocket programs in both the Soviet Union and the United States. The V-1 was the kind of the first iteration of rocketry, and then the V-2 would eventually, we'll go into that, become the main rocket that becomes the game changer for all the countries that are involved. We've all heard of Wernher von Braun. He was kind of the genius of the German rocket program. This was the individual that the United States went in. He actually more volunteered to come to the United States after the war had ended. If I'm Wernher von Braun, do I want to go to the Soviet Union or do I want to go to the United States of America? And he was smart enough to make that decision. But this is one of the key individual really that put the United States ahead in the space program to get us to the point to land on the moon first. This German rocket was a method of war. So it was originally had nothing to do with science, even though Wernher von Braun grew up as a child dreaming about space travel, dreaming about going to the moon, going to Mars, and his ideas weren't necessarily war related, but they ended up being exactly that. And one of the difficult parts about the creation of this rocket and the use of this rocket were human lives used to build them, human lives that were destroyed through World War II. Germany. Let me go back. I'll go here. Germany really was in a position where they were getting bombarded by the Allied forces, and this was their solution to fight back. Was building this rocket, and it was put together more towards the end of the war. A lot of analysts thought that if Germany were able to put this technology together sooner than they did, things could have ended much differently than they did with the Allied forces winning the war. But in the meantime, you've got London and Antwerp getting bombarded by these rockets. They were still in the early stages of development. They were still in the early stages of using gyroscopic technology to steer them, but they still did obviously plenty of damage. Well, we all know how the war ended, and once the war ended, both the United States and other Allied forces, as well as the Soviet Union, went into Germany, and they tried to grab as much intellectual property as they could. They knew that there was a high level of technology when it came to warfare with planes, with rockets, chemical warfare, medical science. This was all intellectual property that every country was trying to get their hands on as quickly as possible. About 1,600 scientists came to the U.S., and something in the neighborhood of over 2,000 went to the Soviet Union. But von Braun really was the key individual that the United States was able to utilize to get us to where we needed to be. Operation Paperclip was the United States code for this project, to be able to go in, grab documentation, grab scientists, grab any kind of technology they could in the form of hardware, in any range. So the big things that the Germans were working on were a lot of pilots were being shot down in the ocean. So they were doing a lot of medical experiments, unfortunately, on human beings to try and understand how the human body could handle, things like dogfights, things like keeping people alive in water as long as possible, all kinds of medicine. Chemical weapons was a big part of their technology. So that was a big part of what the United States and the Soviet Union wanted to get their hands on. And of course, once we learned about the V-2 rocket, that was the key piece that needed to be uncovered. So grabbing actual finished product, raiding those manufacturing sites in Germany, and getting their hands on as much as they could. This is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it, Operation Paperclip, and it really goes through the detail, in extreme detail, of how this program worked. Unfortunately, it's very disturbing about what took place and how the Germans treated the individuals that helped get them to this point. So the United States were able to get their hands on Wernher von Braun. The Soviet Union had a genius young rocketeer named Sergei Korolev. And he had the same kind of visions as von Braun. He was fascinated with space travel, fascinated with the skies. And this gentleman was the key individual from the Soviet Union to get them to where they needed to be as a country. He was the key figure. Obviously, they grabbed a lot of German scientists that were involved in the rocketry with Germany, but he was the key figure that was able to get the Soviet Union to the point where they started to, put the first man in space, put the first animals in space, and move forward from there. So meanwhile, we've got other things happening in technology. 1947, we've got Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier. So we've got test pilots now using rocket technology, using a spacecraft that was dropped from a bomber and with a rocket-fueled engine, trying to break the speed of Mach 1. And so Yeager does this with the Bell X-1, 1947. This individual was just one of many that would that eventually become the Mercury 7, the astronauts that were chosen for the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. But this was a key achievement in spaceflight to kind of be the ones that break that sound barrier, this invisible barrier that we weren't sure how a human being would handle speed. And the guy did it with broken ribs. He had gone horseback riding with his wife the day before, fell off a horse, breaks a couple ribs, hides it from the military, and still gets the job done. You have a lot of infrastructure happening in the United States at this time. World War II, the advancement of chemical weapons, this was a big deal. And the United States' response to that was putting together infrastructure in our country to accomplish the same goals. So the Redstone Arsenal came around early 1940s, and before it became a flight center, before it became the place where the Redstone rocket would eventually be developed and launched, this was originally a chemical weapons a research and development facility. In addition to Redstone, you've got places like right here in Denver, Rocky Mountain Arsenal, where they were doing chemical tests also for the military, all related to what was happening in World War II, the United States' version, and trying to understand and utilize chemical weapons that luckily weren't used that often, but this is obviously a place that even today you can still see the signs up there for beware of what happened in this place and what the contamination of the ground. They're using here a rabbit just to test to make sure there were no leaks in any of these containers that held sarin gas. I know. White Sands Missile Range, so this became an important infrastructure for the United States for testing. This is where the Trinity tests were done. This is where a lot of the first V2 rockets were taken and starting the process of disassembling them, kind of backwards engineering the rockets to try and understand how they could be used. At this point, we're still in war mode. We're still trying to see how these V2s could be used as a military weapon, not necessarily for science. But a lot of testing was done here at White Sands Missile Range, and of course, this is still an active site today that is used by the military. So the V2 rocket, originally a weapon of war, slowly starts to become a weapon of science, utilized for science. And one of the first tests that was done was a suborbital test of the V2 rocket to get the first image of the curvature of our planet. So 1946, suborbital V2 launches from the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico and captures this. Absolutely spectacular view of the Earth. You can even see the curvature, you can see the clouds. It ended up crash landing, but they were able to secure the camera and the film so well that even in the crash land, they were able to recover the images and have them for research for science. 1950s now, so we're starting to get into what's called the bumper program. This is the United States trying to balance scientific research with military research and military advancement. So on the scientific side, we're trying to understand high altitude flight. We're trying to understand the different levels of our atmosphere because now we're sending spacecraft up into the different layers of our atmosphere and understanding how that works. Understanding supersonic speeds and how those affect the spacecraft technology, as well as what is the potential for a human being on board. And this is where testing staging concepts really starts coming into play. Everything so far has essentially just been a single stage. Now we're looking at the development of multi-stage rockets. On the military side, we're looking at trying to improve the rocket guidance and control, so being able to pinpoint that rocket exactly where we want it to go. Continue to develop multi-stage rocket technology on the military side. And of course, all of this is leading towards which country can create that first ICBM and create a rocket technology that could cross oceans and reach an enemy. Nikita Khrushchev he kind of succeeds the power of Joseph Stalin. So he's here in this picture, and then he ends up on the cover of Time magazine once he takes over the Soviet Union. And he becomes the key figure, kind of, I don't want to compare him to John F. Kennedy, but he's their version of the propaganda machine. We want to show how mighty Russia is. We want to show how mighty our technology is. We want to be the dominant force on planet Earth. And so he was the one that was really started to really drive the space race from the Soviet Union side. So now we're in 1955. We've got a lot going on right now. We're kind of in the middle of the space race now. So you've got the Soviet Union. They've taken German engineers. They've got Korolev on their side building rocket technology, and they're moving very, very quickly. On the U.S. side, we've got Wernher von Braun continuing to work with U.S. Engineers and trying to put together the first satellites and the first spacecraft for the United States of America. But you got a lot of things going on here. You've still got African Americans trying to win their rights in the United States. Albert Einstein passed away that year. You've got nuclear powered submarines. So a lot is building, a lot of tension in the world. So Baikonur Cosmodrome, this is the Soviet Union's version of Kennedy Space Center. This is where they built and started launching their spacecraft, a massive complex that they dedicated in Kazakhstan. And this would become, even to this day, where the Soviet Union would be launching their technology. Soviet Union is working on what they call the R7 rocket family. So you can kind of see the stages of development in time. Starting with 1957, we're getting close to the point where we're putting Sputnik into orbit around the Earth. Vostok will eventually put Yuri Gagarin in orbit, and then onto Soyuz. Similar technology to the United States, different in the sense of how they built the rockets, but again, multi-stage boosters hitting different stages of the atmosphere, eventually getting us to the point for a translunar injection. And so October 4th, 1957, I think November 7th is the Soviet Union's anniversary. So they were pushing very, very hard to reach this milestone date of hitting November 7th and using their rocket technology. Out of nowhere, all of a sudden there's a satellite orbiting the Earth. Nothing spectacular about this satellite. It was literally a radio encased inside of this metal ball. But we went from a space race trying to determine who was where, and the Soviet Union's win the first stage of the race by putting a satellite into orbit. And this creates, obviously, huge alarms around the rest of the world. Everyone knows at this time that the Soviet Union is in a position of power, has the potential now to put a nuclear warhead on one of these satellites. So if they can put a satellite November 3rd, 1957, Sputnik 2. So not only has the Soviet Union now put a satellite into space, they're biological entities into space. And Laika, which means bark in Russian, is a stray dog that they pull off the streets, and they strap this dog. You can kind of see the tip of the spacecraft here. Laika would be in this compartment here. This is Sputnik 2 satellite on top, but fastened into the spacecraft. The Soviet Union rushed this job. They really rushed it. They were trying to hit specific deadlines. Korolev was pushing this. The government was pushing this. And again, their goal was to be first at everything. And they were willing to sacrifice safety in order to do that. Laika was originally designed to be about 7 days in orbit. On the 7th day, the food system and the water system that was distributed that 7th day had a toxin in it that would basically put her to sleep. But she only made it, I want to say, 4 or 5 orbits, and they had a malfunction on the temperature control system, and unfortunately she suffocated and burned. But again, as bad as all of that is, we're continuing to push forward, not only put satellites in space, but now put animals in space. And then the Soviet Union would eventually, on Sputnik 7, they end up putting flies, a rabbit, some birds, and they all survived. They all came back. So, very quickly they learned and made improvements and continued to push forward. United States does a live television program of our try at putting a satellite into space. This was the Vanguard satellite, and it didn't go so well. Putting the finishing touches on the rocket. You can see our satellite there was at the top, which actually survived after the explosion. They found it in a field a few hundred yards away, and it was still ticking, and I think you can see it to this day at the Smithsonian. But this was a big embarrassment for the United States because, again, this was televised live. People were watching this. Obviously, Sputnik 1, Sputnik 2 had happened, and it was a panic mode situation that we still had a long way to go. But of course, we would eventually get there. January 31st, 1958, we put Explorer 1 up into orbit, and this was a huge success, obviously, for the United States of America. You've got Dr. William Pickering from Jet Propulsion. Dr. James Van Allen. This Explorer 1 satellite helped us learn about the Van Allen belts, and so they were obviously named after him. And then Wernher von Braun there on the right. I don't know if are they hearing the audio on Zoom? Do you know? They might. I'm not sure if it's playing or not.
You would have to share your audio with that.
Okay, no worries. But this is a recording of the Juno spacecraft that is putting Explorer 1 into orbit. And this spacecraft is at the Rocket Garden at Kennedy Space Center at the Visitor Center. Still see that rocket upright next to one of the Saturn 1Bs there. I'm not sure why this was a night flight. Does anyone know?
Did they televise it?
I'm not sure.
I wonder if they wanted to get out of televising it. Oh, but good night, you can't see it anyway.
Right, possibly. So that brings us to 1958. NASA is founded. At this point, all of the rocket technology, everything of the progression that the United States had done so far was it was done by multiple agencies. And so what our government was really looking to do is create a dedicated agency that would be 100% focused on rocket technology and the drive towards progression in space. So NASA, kind of a civilian agency, was created and founded in order to further progress the rocket technology for the United States. So meanwhile, the Soviet Union, they're working on their rocket that's going to take them to the moon, and this would be their version of the Saturn V. A massive rocket. You can see some of the engineers down here. This was something like, the circumference was something like over 60 feet. But, the Saturn V had, the 5 rocket engines here. This one had 30 at the base. It was a very complicated system, but this was Sergei Korolev's vision, multi-stage, just like the Saturn V. The astronauts and the lunar lander would be at the top, just like it on the Saturn V. But this would ultimately be the Soviet Union's demise, and one of the reasons why we beat them to the moon is they could not get this rocket to the point where they could successfully put human beings off planet. And I'll be going into a lot more of this in part 2 when we go through the Apollo program, because you have all of these things happening simultaneously between the two countries. But this rocket was, the vision was obviously fantastic, but they could never get it to the point where they could get a successful launch out of it. And meanwhile, some of the largest non-nuclear explosions that ever happened on Earth was this rocket exploding on the launch pad. So part 2 of this presentation next month will be Mercury to the moon. Some of the things that I didn't necessarily have a slide to go over. 1961, April 12th was huge. Yuri Gagarin is the first man put into, not only into space, but into orbit on the same time. So we'll go into that a little bit in the next one. The Soviet Union puts the first woman in orbit around the Earth, which was fantastic. But the detail in this next presentation will really go into the scientific technology of how we put our astronauts up into space. So dates going forward. So this presentation today, the next one will be April 10th, and that's where we'll go through Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. On May 15th, Joe's going to be doing the shuttle program. The Voyager missions will be done by Abraham Sanchez. I'm looking forward to those. And then July 17th, Pavlina is going to do the Mars rovers. So just a quick little history lesson to bring everyone up to speed, get us into the real detail, which will be next month, where we go into the amazing technology that was put together in order to get us to the moon first. Thank you.
Thank you.